The murder of Dr. Victoria Mutiso, the Billion-Shilling Land War. 9:23 a.m., Nairobi. A cab slows at a junction in Upper Hill. A black Toyota Prado rolls out and blocks the road. Nobody in that taxi has time to react before a man on the back of a motorcycle levels a pistol at the rear window and puts 3 bullets into the woman sitting there. She's a psychologist, a researcher, a woman who spent her career treating other people's trauma. 20 minutes later, she's pronounced dead at Kenyatta National Hospital. And the reason she was murdered in broad daylight in one of Nairobi's most expensive districts traces back to a single piece of paper, a land title worth 1.5 billion shillings. This is the murder of Dr. Victoria Nthunya Mutiso. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, a police officer, a lawyer, and a presidential candidate's family are all going to be tied to the same crime scene. Who was she? Dr. Mutiso wasn't some random victim. She was a clinical psychologist and mental health researcher, the kind of person who spent her days helping other people process grief and violence. She had no criminal record, no known enemies in the traditional sense. On the morning she died, she was doing something completely mundane, riding an Uber to work from her apartment off Riara Road. But 6 months earlier, she'd done something that would get her killed. She'd walked into the Machakos courts and placed a legal caveat on a 20-acre piece of land in Mlolongo, near the weighbridge on the Nairobi-Mombasa highway. That single legal filing is where this story actually begins. And what happens next will make you question exactly how far people will go over property. The land. Here's what you need to understand about this parcel of land. It's not some empty plot in the middle of nowhere. It sits in Athi River, one of the fastest growing industrial corridors in Kenya, and it's valued at roughly 1.5 billion Kenyan shillings. Dr. Mutiso was named in a civil case tied to this property, a dispute that had been dragging through the Machakos courts for a long time. She'd placed a caveat on the title, essentially a legal flag that freezes a property, preventing it from being sold or transferred until ownership is settled. For most people, that's paperwork. For whoever was on the other side of that caveat, it was apparently a threat worth eliminating. And according to investigators, that's exactly what happened next. Her family home on a related property was demolished, and shortly after she started receiving death threats. She reported it, and weeks later, she was dead. The first arrests. 2 days after the shooting, police picked up a woman named Rose Mbithe Mulwa and her son, Chris Mulwa. Mulwa was the plaintiff in the civil case, the person who had filed the lawsuit that named Dr. Mutiso as a defendant over the disputed land. Investigators told the court they believed the pair had knowledge of who carried out the killing, and that if released, they could tip off the shooters or destroy evidence. A magistrate ordered them held for 21 days. But here's where it gets complicated, because the next person arrested wasn't just connected to the land dispute. She's a practicing lawyer, with 26 years standing at the bar, and she's Rose Mulwa's daughter. The lawyer. Angela Mulwa was arraigned days after her mother, accused of something separate but deeply connected, allegedly stealing the title documents to that same billion-shilling parcel of land in Mlolongo. Prosecutors told the court she may be implicated not just in the fraud case, but in the murder itself. Her defense argued she was an officer of the court with 2 decades of standing, unlikely to flee. She was granted bail. Then police found something that connected this family to an entirely different crime. A Range Rover Sport, worth around 15 million shillings, allegedly stolen from the disputed land parcel itself, turned up in the hands of the lawyer and a co-accused. Investigators say it was one of 4 vehicles missing from the property since May, months before the murder even happened. So now you've got theft, land fraud, and murder, all converging on one family and one piece of land. But the story doesn't stop with a family dispute. Because when detectives started pulling threads on who actually pulled the trigger, they didn't find a hired criminal off the street. They found a badge. The police connection. This is the part of the case that turned it from a local land dispute into a national scandal. Ballistic tests linked the murder weapon, a Jericho pistol, to a firearm officially issued to a police constable stationed at Karinda Police Post. Forensic evidence placed that officer at the scene of the shooting. Investigators identified him as the one who fired the fatal shots, but he wasn't acting alone. The Directorate of Criminal Investigations named a second officer, a police inspector attached to a different station, as the link between whoever financed the killing and the men who carried it out. That inspector is still on the run. Think about what that means. This wasn't an amateur hit. This was, according to the DCI's own director, a coordinated assassination, coordinated well enough to involve law enforcement officers using their own service weapons. A boda rider who allegedly transported the shooter to the scene was also arrested, along with the motorcycle used in the killing. So by this point, investigators aren't just looking at a family fighting over land. They're looking at a network, financiers, a legal team, corrupt police, and a hit squad, all built around protecting a claim to 20 acres of Athi River. Where it stands now. As it stands, the case is still open. Courts have granted investigators repeated extensions to hold suspects while they trace the money and the chain of command behind the killing. Some suspects have been released on bond. Others remain in custody. The inspector allegedly at the center of coordinating the hit is still being hunted. And the land itself, the 20 acres that a woman died defending a legal claim over, is still sitting there in Mlolongo, still worth over $1 billion shillings, still tied up in a civil suit that outlived the person who filed the caveat. What this case exposes isn't just one murder. It's how much a piece of paper can be worth in a country where land value outpaces almost everything else. Enough, allegedly, to buy a police officer's service weapon and a hitman's silence. Dr. Mutiso spent her career trying to understand what makes people break. In the end, it may have been greed over dirt that broke everything around her. If you want to understand how South Africa and Kenya's biggest unsolved and ongoing land and murder cases keep repeating the same pattern, subscribe, because we're about to cover the next one. If you found this video informative, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to True Crime and Scams in South Africa.